pull up the agenda, we'll share screen, and we can start from there.
I let the council member Fan, if he doesn't mind, to lead, because this is his topic.
Sure. So let's call the meeting to order. And all members are present. Let's go with start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Sharon, would you mind leading us?
Thank you, Councilmember Fan. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, let's move on to approval of agenda.
Move to approve.
I'll second the agenda is approved. Let's move to the acceptance of minutes.
Move to accept.
I'll second the minutes are accepted. Moving on to public forum. There are members of the public who would like to speak. Please indicate so, and we will limit remarks to 3 minutes for topics that are not on the agenda tonight or today.
I don't see any raised hand. There's no attendee.
Seeing no participants, we will move forward with the agenda onto the first business item. Staff.
Okay.
Good morning, Sharon. I'm just going to get started, and we are going to cover the project team presentation first, right? So, Good morning, council members. Ashwini Kantak, Assistant City Manager, and we have staff from the Building Safety and Housing Department. We also have our consultant, Debbie Kern, from Kaiser Marston and Associates, and then we have several representatives from the project team who will be starting off with a presentation from them, followed by a presentation of the report from Debbie Kern from Kaiser Marston and Associates. So rather than switching back and forth between the slide decks, we'll start with, I'm not sure if it's Sean Rawson who's going to be presenting. Sean, will you be presenting?
Good morning, Ashwini. It'll be myself and then John Penkower from Cscda. So in order, John will start, and then I'll be going after John.
Great. So can we pull up the slide deck, and the team may want to introduce yourselves to the subcommittee members. Sean.
Yeah, I'm pulling up their slide deck. So.
And then while Sharon's doing that, I'll make a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll turn it over to John. But good morning, everyone, and good morning, council members. We appreciate you hearing this item in the subcommittee. I'm Sean Rawson, the co-founder of Waterford Property Company. We are multifamily developers that are active in both the affordable housing space and in the market rate development space of multifamily apartments. Specific to the middle income program, which we're here to talk about today, we've been in partnership with Cscda, the largest participant in this middle income program. This year to date, we've acquired almost 2,100 units in the program with just over $1.2 billion in bond issuances this year, and have another $230 million in bond issuances that'll be closing in the next 2 weeks. And we're really excited to be here today to talk about our project proposal, and we appreciate your time. With that, I'll turn it over to John.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Good morning, council members and staff. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to present one of CSCDA's newer financing tools today. My name is John Penkower, Managing Director with CSCDA, and I'll give a brief background refresher on CSCDA, and we'll dive right into the program and then the specific project opportunity. Yeah. Am I advancing the slides or? Oh, thank you. Okay. So just a refresher, CSCDA is the largest joint powers authority in the state of California. It was created back in the 1980s by the League of Cities and CSAC, the Counties Association, to provide innovative financing tools for cities and counties. To date, there are 533 cities and counties and special districts, and we operate a variety of different financing programs: nonprofit finance, affordable housing, infrastructure financing. We have a new markets tax credit program, and then workforce housing, which we're going to talk about today. And CSCDA is one of the largest municipal issuers in the nation, having issued more than $65 billion in bonds throughout the country. Next slide. So in affordable housing, we're one of the larger issuers of tax credit funded bond projects, nearly 100,000 units throughout California. And these are generally those for low and very low income individuals. They're generally funded with tax credits and bond allocation. That's becoming increasingly complicated and difficult right now. Given the housing crisis all throughout the state, we're oversubscribed for those subsidies. And it's probably no surprise to you. It's been covered widely in the news. There's a couple hundred affordable projects right now that are entitled, they're ready to go, and they cannot get their funding sources, which is obviously frustrating for us, our city and county partners, and those nonprofits and for-profit developers that have spent considerable time on those projects. Next slide, please. So the missing middle, that's not our term. You've heard that from governor's office, treasurer's office, local government throughout the state. That what we refer to the missing middle as is those individuals that make more than that 60% of AMI. They don't qualify for traditional affordable housing, but they don't necessarily make enough to live in the communities where they're working. They're commuting an hour and a half, 2 hours each way. Today, I know that's not a secret or a surprise to you all in Santa Clara County specifically. So these are individuals that are within that 60% to 120% of AMI, which is the higher band of low income, and then moderate income individuals and families. These are city and county employees, healthcare workers, first responders, teachers. We'll show you a little bit later in the presentation these same individuals who are taking advantage of our program elsewhere throughout the state. The problem we have is that once you get above that 60 to 80% AMI demographic, that bucket there, we lose all of the traditional subsidies that are available to us. You can't get money from Cscda at the state. We can't get tax credits. We can't get bond allocation. And so we collectively need to come up with new creative solutions for increasing discounted rent for those in that middle income demographic. The workforce housing program that we're going to talk about today finances those projects solely with governmental bonds. It doesn't require equity, doesn't require any other funding sources. It is very similar to the manner in which student housing has been financed. This is, while you're seeing a lot of new activity in California, and we'll talk more about that, the legal structure is not novel. It has been utilized in other states. We use it, again, for student housing and for other types of projects throughout the state, even for cities and counties where they may finance an off-balance sheet new project. Long Beach Civic Center is an example, and there are others throughout the state. The goal of the program is to minimize city liability, staff time, administrative responsibilities. And so we do that by simply having the city participate as the future beneficiary in these projects. They will receive, the city of Milpitas would receive all of the future financial equity in the projects. Again, similar to student housing. When student housing is financed at the end of the term, it goes to the college or the university. It's not an investment for those developers. And similarly here, these projects are not an investment for Cscda or for any of the administrators that are participating in the program. Next slide, please. So this slide here gives you just a sense of where how quickly and vastly the program is expanding. We're actually over 3,500 units since the program inception. You see the cities there, you see the units. We've issued more than 2.1 billion in bonds. There's actually additional projects that are beginning closing next month. 2 in Santa Rosa, 1 in Fairfield. The project in Dublin closed yesterday. And then there's probably another $1 billion in projects, perhaps even more, that will close by the end of the calendar year. So a lot of these cities taking advantage of the program. They're seeing immediate outcomes in new affordability, new tenants being able to take advantage of it. Next slide, please. I'm going to go briefly through this because it's helpful to talk about these in connection with the actual project. But rents, eligibility, rent increases are protected under the program. Rents cannot go up unless there's growth in the AMI for those individuals. And even in that case, there's a 4% cap. You can distinguish that from state rent control law right now, which is 5% plus CPI. So think of that more in the 7 to 8% range. Again, those are for existing tenants. A lot of these properties, including Turing and others, will have 40 to 50% turnover every year. So that state rent control does not protect any of those units. Once they become vacant, those rents can be reset and marked up to market rent. So what you'll see is rental savings year one in every category, but over time, you'll start seeing much more dramatic rental savings for the residents going out 5 years from now, even at the higher ends, even at the 120% AMI level. Many residents may already qualify. They're spending half of their paycheck or more on rent. And so this program will allow them to spend a more reasonable percentage of their income on rent. That gives them more disposable income to spend in the community, on local businesses, save perhaps for that down payment on a first home, pay for healthcare, education, or otherwise. These are not Section 8 voucher programs. Next slide, please. Briefly here, the way that the city controls the asset and receives the future income from it is through the public benefit agreement. And this is the one document that the city is a party to. It's not otherwise a participant in the bond documents or the operation or ownership of the project. It allows the city, beginning in year 15, to force a sale of the asset and receive all of the equity that has accrued over time. The city doesn't have to do anything at year 15. They could wait until year 30 when the bonds are expected to be paid off. And most importantly, the city does not have to own the real estate. Most cities do not want to be the owners of these type of properties. And so you have options. You could have the property transferred to a nonprofit, still receive all of the surplus sales proceeds, retain the affordability, perhaps in perpetuity. We think a really good exit for cities, especially with newer assets, is down the road, is to deepen the affordability, potentially put them into the tax credit program and keep those regulatory agreements in place. As a reminder, there's no fees, costs, there's no liabilities or administrative responsibilities, and then all of the cash flow that is derived through these properties can only go one of two places. Can go back into the project or to pay down the bond principal. There's no equity stakeholders. It would violate the tax and legal rules to have any other private interests associated with these projects. Next slide, please. I think these are the last two, and then we can stop and take some questions, and then we'll talk about the project. But you saw the pipeline of those that participated. Anaheim and Long Beach were some of the earlier participants. This shows you Ocean Air Apartments. It's in Long Beach. It was a newly constructed Class A asset. This is just in a 3-month period. We're now, I believe, over 60 lease conversions. And this shows you the individuals that are now occupying that that project. This is comforting to us and to our Cscda commission members that we're getting the desired outcomes from this program. You see city employees, you see sheriff's department, school district employees, other first responders. You can see their accompanying incomes there. And they're now able to live in a community where they're currently working, and a nice Class A property. Next slide. Thank you. And then this is also Anaheim. We're over 200 lease conversions just since March, and you see similar profiles there where you have city, county, state employees, healthcare workers, sheriff's department, city employees. We're continuing to farm this type of data, talk with tenants, see how this program has improved their lives. So we're really pleased to see this even in a very short period of time. We're seeing similar outcomes in the other cities that were referenced in that prior slide. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. Participation is pretty straightforward. It's very similar to a TEFRA hearing, although we don't even need a public hearing under this program. The city is already a member of Cscda. So to participate, the city would opt into this program. The assets are held in one of Cscda's affiliate legal entities that owns the properties. The city acknowledges that Cscda is going to issue bonds for the projects, again, similar to a TEFRA hearing. And then lastly, the city would consent to that public benefit agreement, which is that one document the city is a party to. All that document does is confer all the future income, sales proceeds to the city. It also provides the city with the sole disposition rights to that property. Again, no costs, fees, responsibilities for participating. So with that, I will stop. Perhaps there's questions. Otherwise, we can talk more specifically about the Turing project.
Evelyn, do you have questions?
No, I'm just writing down notes. Not right now. Thanks.
Sure.
Councilmember Pan.
Who else is presenting next?
Councilmember, sorry.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. That's Sean?
Correct. Councilmember Dan Roth, and the next slide.
Go for it. Yeah, I'll reserve my questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. And I do not want to be redundant to John's presentation, which was really a thorough presentation on the program. So we'll jump into some project specifics. I do want to touch on, though, and if you don't mind, thank you, Sharon. I'll give you a quick background on the project team, a little background on our experience in the program, and then we'll jump into the specific project proposal for Turing. But again, Waterford Property Company, as I mentioned earlier, we will be the project administrator in partnership with Cscda, who will own the asset. And then we have worked exclusively with Goldman Sachs as our bond underwriter to issue these bonds. And as previously mentioned, we've done just over $1.2 billion in issuances with them. Next slide, please. One of the things that John touched on in his last two slides, and what I wanted to touch on, is the target demographic for these assets. As John mentioned, the missing middle has been a really challenging and difficult segment to provide housing for, because they're households that make too much to qualify for traditional low and very low income housing, but not enough to potentially live in Class A market rate assets, or even if they do, they're spending a disproportionate amount of their income on a monthly basis to be able to afford to live there. And so what we've seen in the 2,100 units that we've had in our portfolio has been really, really encouraging. The demographic that are living in our assets are school teachers, public safety employees, government employees, healthcare professionals, and other essential workers. And so from just a data standpoint, we've really seen in just a short amount of time, 6 months, the success of this program. So much so that Mayor Garcia from Long Beach has reached out because we showed him the data of the Ocean Air project that John mentioned, and is going to be having the city put out a large press release touting the success of that project. Next slide, please. This is just a quick overview of some of the assets that Waterford has been involved in. Altana in the city of Glendale, a newly constructed Class A asset, Ocean Air, the city of Long Beach, the Jefferson in Anaheim. And then we've done projects in the city of Pasadena, another project in Anaheim, and then we'll be closing next week on 2 projects in the city of Orange. The one point that's relevant to this slide is that you look at these pictures, all of these assets are newly constructed Class A assets and are similar in asset class to Turing, which is obviously a premier Class A asset in the city of Milpitas. Next slide, please. So jumping into Turing, as you, I'm sure all know, it's a 371 unit Class A asset located at 1355 McCandless Drive. If the city decides to move forward with our proposal, we'd be acquiring the asset from Lion Communities, who's a large stakeholder in the city, and a company that we've got a great relationship with, and they've been a large and active stakeholder in the city of Milpitas. As you can see here, we have a breakdown of the unit mix and the location proximity to BART. Next slide, please. So one of the things we wanted to touch on is, so this slide really does a good job of breaking out the income levels. And how we structure these deals is typically we do a third of the units when we record the regulatory agreement that are made affordable to households making between 60 and 80% of the area median income. And then the next third moves up to 81 to 100% of the area median income. And the last third, 101 to 120. And that's the proposal that we've made to the city of Milpitas. There is some flexibility that we can potentially rearrange some of those income bands within the existing 60 to 80, 81 to 100, and 101 to 120. For instance, in the city of Anaheim, they had asked us to do some additional units at the 60 to 80 band. And we said we could, but we reallocated some of the hundreds and 120s. So in Anaheim, what we did was 40% of the units at 60 to 80, 20% of the units at 81 to 100, and then 40% of the units at 101 to 120. The typical default proposal is that we do a third, a third, a third, but we're more than willing and happy to work with you, the city, if it wanted to rearrange some of those affordability levels. The key takeaway, the last point of that previous slide, if you don't mind, the key takeaway on this slide is, and I know we'll jump into the regulatory agreement when Debbie speaks from KMA, but one point I do want to make is that the investors in these projects are municipal bond investors. These are social impact bonds, and so when we underwrite and sell the bonds, we have to show a significant discount to market rents relative to the asset. And in this slide, as you can see, what we're showing here is a 10% discount to market in the first year, and then a total aggregate rental savings of 1.446 million, which will increase as the life of the project moves on. With that, we can go to the next slide, Sharon. And again, there was KMA and Debbie and her team, they've done a great job analyzing the project. I think that there was some some different methodologies that we had used, and I know that they've arrived at an exit price, and I'll tell you that our assumptions were a little different. But nevertheless, what I wanted to do with this slide is show that the city becomes the beneficiary to all of the equity in this asset. So once the bonds are paid off, the way that this program works is that Waterford nor Cscda has an equity interest in the asset. Once the asset is paid off, the city of Milpitas becomes the long-term equity beneficiary in the asset. There's different methodologies in terms of how you get to an exit value. I will candidly say, based on the methodology we saw in the KMA report, I thought that they were very conservative in how they got to their exit value, and some of their capital needs assessments, which I'm happy to speak to. But that all said, the key takeaway here is that you've got a multifamily asset that will be paid off. The city will be the beneficiary to all the equity. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Sharon. So I did want to touch on a few of the KMA recommendations, and just really kind of start with an overview of the alignment of interest. So the key takeaway on this structure is that these projects this is a new program, and as John mentioned, we're rolling it out throughout the state. But there's certain things that differ in these projects from traditional affordable housing projects. We're active in the tax credit space, and we know that space extremely well. And there's certain things that work in this program from the traditional tax credit space or affordable space, and there's certain things that do not. The key takeaway, though, is that the way that these assets or these transactions are structured, it's a really elegant structure to align the interests of the city, the project administrator, and the bond investors. And what I mean by that is that the project administrator, we don't have any equity in the asset. We do receive a subordinate bond, which is a B bond. And the bond investors require that because that's the only financial interest that we have in the asset, besides typical management fees that you would get in any real estate transaction. And so from a alignment of interest standpoint, the project administrator is heavily vested to make sure that the asset performs in an extremely well manner, because if there was any area where the asset wasn't performing, then we would put our B bonds at risk. The other key thing is that we do not have, and I know that KMA will touch on the regulatory agreement, because that's been a big topic when we've gone back and forth. But the project administrator has no incentive to raise the rents above what we've underwritten. And we've underwritten a 10% discount to market. And from a cash flow perspective, we don't have any cash flow participation from the asset. Unlike a traditional affordable housing project where the affordable housing developer candidly actually has an interest to raise the rents because they receive the lion's share of the cash flow. In these assets, we do not make any more money if rents go up at the asset. So candidly, we have an incentive to keep the rents as low as possible. Because that maintains great relationships with the city. B, candidly, it's always easier to rent a lower priced apartment than a market rate apartment. The one thing I will say though is if the rents did go up and if we charge higher rents per the regulatory agreement, the city's the financial beneficiary to that, because that just means that you're paying off the bonds in an expedited manner. So I wanted to just lay that point out. But as it relates to rent reductions and the regulatory agreement, I know that Debbie and her team will be going through that. There was topics of the property condition report. What I will tell you is that we've gone through the KMA analysis. We thought that they were conservative in terms of some of the assessments as it relates to property condition reserves. The way that we've underwritten our project is that over the life of the 35 years, we have almost $16 million in reserves to maintain the asset, $6 million financed into the bond issuance, and then we have almost $12 million coming out of operating reserves. And then from affordability, compliance, cash flow projections, bond underwriting assumptions, we can talk through that. There's a lot of content in that KMA report, but we got it last Friday, and so we do have some thoughts on some of the I guess the recommendations in there. One other thing too is that these assets, they do come off the tax rolls. So there's no soft funding in these assets besides the tax abatement. So unlike a traditional affordable housing project that will have state and federal tax credits, typically they'll also have soft funding from the local jurisdiction, whether it be a city or county, and they come off the tax rolls. The only soft funding source, if you will, in these assets for the middle income is the property tax abatement. One thing that just came to light actually yesterday is that based on the research that we've done, is that Milpitas Unified School District is a local control formula district. So it was told to us through their tax counsel that the state would backfill the loss of local property taxes to the school district. And we haven't even had a chance to discuss that with staff, but that had come to our attention yesterday. So I did want to make that point. Don't mind going to the last slide, Sharon. So to John's point, the approval process in the cities that we've gone through so far has been a pretty easy, seamless approval process. The two discretionary actions that the city needs to do, is, as John mentioned, is adopting a resolution to join the Affiliate Joint Powers Authority for Cscda's workforce housing program, and then to approve the language of the public benefit agreement. And both those documents we have provided to staff. From a fee standpoint, liability standpoint, there's no liability that the city takes by issuing these bonds, and there's no fees that they would incur as well. With that, I'm done with my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilmember Chua, do you have any questions? Sorry, you're muted.
Oh, not right now, Councilmember Fan. I will
Sure.
Later on.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Thank you, Sean. Let's move forward with the next presenter.
Hey, good morning again, council members. So I'm just, if we could get the other slide deck up, please.
Is the next presentation from KMA?
Yes, Councilmember Fan. I'm just going to do a brief overview, background, and then KMA will be walking you through the slides, the draft report. So just kind of a quick reminder here on the background on this topic. So at the May 11th meeting, the city council, it was a city council meeting at which Councilmember Fan, you had requested council to consider providing direction to staff on an opportunity to create middle income workforce housing through the California Statewide Communities Development Authority, or CSCDA. And council did provide direction to staff to enter into an agreement with a consultant to conduct a study. And the study was to be paid for by the project owner, and basically to explore the CSCDA proposal that you just heard about for a specific site within the Fields project. And council had asked staff to bring the information back to before council at a future meeting. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Kern, who's been working with us closely and with the project team as well, to kind of analyze the proposal, and she'll be walking you through some of her findings and recommendations. So I'll turn it over to Debbie. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ashwini. I'm Debbie Kern with Kaiser Marston, and I'm the managing principal of our Berkeley office. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about the program. And, you know, Waterford has provided a great introduction information, so hopefully I won't be too much of a duplication. So the purpose of our review was to first look at the affordable housing benefits that the project would generate to the city. The second was to look at the financial returns to the city relative to the cost of foregoing property tax revenue for the bond term. And the third objective was to look at the transaction and identify any potential risks to the city. And the last was to document the feedback received from some staff of other cities that have declined to participate in a similar program by Cscda. Next slide. Well, you know what, Sean and John did a great job, so I don't really need to go forward with, you know, describing more of the program. It's exactly what they said. Next slide. And as they said, that it's a, you know, it's a program in which the authority issues tax exempt bonds to acquire the project, and the bond funds are used for acquisition costs as well as to fund reserve accounts, capital replacement reserves, and provide upfront payments and capitalized payments to the administrator and to Cscda. And as they said, repayment of the bonds is secured solely by the revenues generated by the project, and the city bears no responsibility for the operation of the project or for the repayment of the bonds. The authority, you know, is an independent agency, joint powers authority, and so the city has no responsibility in that regard. Next slide. The bond term is, the general term is between 30 and 35 years. And in this case, Waterford has estimated that the bonds will be retired in over 34 years. And under the program, as they mentioned, that the city can call for a sale anytime after year 15, but that is contingent upon that there be sufficient proceeds to defease the outstanding bond debt. So that is the condition under which you can call for a sale in year 15. And if you did, then the income restrictions would be terminated, the bonds would be paid off, and then the project could be resold at market rate values or go forward as a tax credit project. And the project would be conveyed on an as-is basis, which means that it's in the condition that it is at the time of sale. And so, if there are any repairs that need to be made to turn around and sell the property at fair market value, then the future owner or the city would be responsible for making those repairs. And as they indicated, the city would receive all available net sales proceeds, and that's above what's required to pay off existing debt. So the city is the only entity that would have the right to all of those proceeds. Next slide. So just diving into the topic of creating affordability. Once it's acquired by the authority, the project would be exempt from paying all ad valorem property taxes. It would still be required to continue to pay assessments on the property, but not any taxes that are derived based upon value. And the way the project works is that the savings that are created by the abatement of property taxes is used to reduce the project's rents and restrict the rents to moderate income levels, that 80% to 120% throughout the bond term. Next slide. So this is just another picture of Turing, and as they mentioned, it is a Class A project. It was completed in 2019. It offers a very broad array of amenities, both interior and exterior. It has, quartz countertops, washer, dryer in the units. It has a rooftop pool, lots of other amenities. So it's a great project. This is just a recap of the unit mix. So there's 371 units. And as you can see, most of the units are 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The average size is about 940 square feet. And as you can see here, the average rent across the units is about $3,155 per month. Next slide. So next slide. One of the first things we did was look at, well, how does the rents of this project currently stack up relative to market rate rents in citywide rents in Milpitas? And one thing that I wanted to mention is that there aren't very many 3-bedroom units in the project. There's only 9 of them, which is 2% of the project. Now, in the citywide, there aren't very many 3-bedroom units, and they're primarily in very older projects. So as you can see here, that the rent differential on the 3 bedrooms is very high because of the touring project has much larger units compared to the other units in the market area, and the other units are much older. So as you can see here, the average difference is $560 per month. However, based upon our conversation that we had with the applicant team, I know that there was concern about that there are some older units in our market, in our citywide survey. And so I went back and looked at the survey and looked at just the units that have been built since 2014. And as it happens, there were about 2/3 of all of the units citywide are about 4,000. And 2/3 were built since 2014. And if you look at just those units, the average difference in rent is less compared to compared to the touring, but it's still significant in that, and I can go through that in more detail. Next slide. So as they mentioned, the affordable program that they're proposing is that 33% of the units would be restricted at 80% of AMI, 33% at 100% AMI, and 33% at 120% AMI. And that would be in accordance with the formulas of the Cscda program, which are very similar to the tax credit program, but different than the HCD formulas, which the city is probably more familiar with. The administrator anticipates that there will be a 3-year transition period for all the units to convert to income eligible households, but nobody knows what that period will be. And based upon my conversations with Waterford, they don't know how many current tenants are income eligible versus the number of tenants that have incomes that exceed 120. And so we don't know today how many existing tenants will participate in the program and will be eligible for the rent reductions. Next slide. So the proposed rental rates, for the 33%, the third of the units that will go down and be eligible for at 80% of AMI levels, those tenants would receive a 12% reduction in rent, which would approximate about $400 per month. The tenants that are at 100% AMI would receive a 10% reduction, which is about $315 a month. The tenants that earn 120% AMI up to 120% would receive the smallest reduction of 8%, or $253 per month on average. So across the board, the reduction would be 10%, which is consistent with what Waterford indicated is the requirements of the program, of a 10% reduction relative to market. And the 10% reduction is relative to the market rate rents of the project, not relative to citywide market rate levels or other projects. It's 10% relative to the project itself. And so the average reduction would be $322 per month, we estimate. So that's what existing income eligible tenants, how their rent profile would change. New income eligible tenants, as units turn over, their rents under the program are limited by the Cscda limits, which are not these rents that I'm showing in the slide of the for the existing tenants, but they are limited by the Cscda limits, which provide for higher rents. And as I indicated, once tenants are in place, the annual escalation on rents is equal to either the percentage growth in the AMI or 4% per year, whichever is less. So as I'll go through in other slides, the AMI for many years remains flat and then it jumps up a lot. So those years in which the AMI is 0 or 1% or 2%, rents will not be able to go on existing tenants, will not be able to go up more than that AMI. And then conversely, when the AMI jumps up by 10%, the rents will not go up by 10%. They will be capped at 4% because that's the condition of the program. Next slide. So this just provides a comparison of what the current Turing rents versus the proposed rents that they're proposing for the existing income eligible tenants, and it just shows the difference that I was discussing. And so you can see that the average rent for income eligible tenants will be about $2,830 per month compared to the current average of $3,155. So that's where you get the $322 savings, which is a 10% reduction. In the 3 bedrooms, they're proposing a larger decrease than the average of 10%. But it doesn't really play into the averages too much because there's only 2% of the units are 3 bedroom. Now, as I mentioned, when units vacate and they turn over, then those rents can be higher than what the rents that are paid by existing tenants. And as you can see here, when those rents roll over, the average rent could be up to $4,064 per unit per month, which is significantly higher than actually the current rents on Turing. And they're obviously much higher than the rents that are that the existing tenants will pay that are eligible for the rent reductions. Next slide. So this just shows the difference between the maximum that's permitted under the Cscda program versus HCD rents. And HCD calculates maximum housing costs based upon 30% of income, whereas Cscda allows the rents to be calculated based upon 35% of income. And there's a different treatment of utility costs in that HCD requires housing costs. The 30% of income applies to a combination of rent plus utilities. With Cscda, the 35% is for rent, and then utility costs can be charged on top of that. So because of those two factors, that's why the rents that are allowed under the Cscda program are so much higher than the maximum HCD rents. So you can see on average, it's about over $1,000 a unit difference between those maximum rents, or a 37% difference. Next slide. This is just a summation of a comparison of these rental rates. So, and as you can see here, the maximum that's permitted under Cscda is the highest rent. So if we weight the Cscda maximum rents based upon the unit mix at the Turing, we would get that their average, the maximum rent would be, as I mentioned, $4,000 a unit. Turing, the current average is at $3,155, weighted by unit mix. HCD is at $3,000. The proposed rents for the existing tenants under the program with the reductions, with that 10% reduction, would be $2,830. And then the citywide market rate rent for units built since 2014 is about $2,740. And if you look at all of the units that in the city with over 100 units, the average rent is $2,600. Again, that's weighted based upon the unit mix at Turing. So you can see that the Cscda rents do not provide, a significant cap relative to affordability. That, they under the program, you couldn't charge over what the market is. So you probably could never charge those Cscda rents unless the market goes up a lot, which it could. If market rents go up a lot, then these new tenants, as the units roll over, would be you could charge them much more. As they indicated, the applicant doesn't have any economic interest themselves for increasing rents. The reason to increase rents is to keep the project viable so that it can pay debt service on those bonds and retire the bonds, pay increases in operating expenses. So, as over a 30-year term, a lot of things can happen. And given that the existing tenants, their rent increases will be capped based upon that AMI percentage, it is likely that, the new tenants, the rents on those new tenants will have to go up significantly in order to achieve that overall average of 3% growth that they've pro forma in their cash flows. Next slide. This just shows a history of the AMI versus market rate increases of rents in Milpitas. And the orange line shows the AMI. And as you can see, for many years it's flat, and then it took off, like in year 2017 or 2017. Whereas income has gone up, market area rents have gone up at a more steady pace. However, there have been periods when they've had sharp declines. Next slide. So this just provides a summary of that graph, of the graphic. And as you can see here, over the last 10-year period, market area rents, citywide rents, have gone up at an average annual rate of 2.8%. Area median income has gone up at an average annual rate of 2.2%. However, you can see there are many years in which they're flat. And so, like, if you look over the past 10 years, 5 of those years, it has been either flat or 1% per year. And so if that kind of pattern goes forward, then in those years, that's, the rents on existing tenants could not go up more than the AMI, which would make it flat or 1%. And then conversely, when those years, if it goes up, the AMI goes up by 6% or 11% or 5% or 8%, like in this chart, in those years, the rents could only go up by 4%. And so you wouldn't be able to recapture the full increase in AMI in your rent structure. Next slide. So in terms of our conclusions about affordability and how the program would enhance affordability, the program will create 371 deed restricted moderate income units throughout the bond term, which is approximately 30 years. So it would have, it would restrict them. And they would no longer be market rate units. They would be income and rent restricted units. And the rental rates paid by existing income eligible tenants would decrease on average about 10% or $323 per month to an average of $2,800 per month. A big concern, though, of the cities is that the reduced rental rate of that $2,830 per month, it's significantly higher than the citywide average rental rate for market rate apartments. So with those reductions, it's great for the tenants of this project, but in terms of achieving a deeper level of affordability, it is still higher than the market rate rents. Going forward, the rents on new leases would be governed by the Cscda limits, not those rents that are being offered to existing tenants. And the projections prepared by Waterford, they rely on an average annual growth rate for the project of 3% per year. And because of the trends in the AMI, as I discussed, that often the increase is at 0 to 1%. So in order to achieve that 3% average, then you would have to have turnover, a significant turnover of the units, and the rents paid by those new tenants would have to be higher than the rents paid by existing tenants in order to achieve the cash flow projections. So additional consideration we have not talked about is that cities have to meet the regional housing needs assessment unit requirements. And this program, that while we'll have 371 deed restricted moderate income units, the restrictions will not be for 55 years, which is what is required to qualify for RHNA credits. So these units will not provide the city with additional moderate income units that they can use to satisfy the RHNA requirement. So based upon these considerations, our finding is that the near-term affordability benefits would be very limited because the rents are higher than market area rents for citywide, and then also they're higher than the rents for the units that have been built since 2014 citywide. I'm not saying, and that's not with respect to, they're not higher than Turing's current rents. They could be for units that turn over. And I'm not saying that they're higher than market area rents throughout the entire county. But when you look at just Milpitas citywide rents, that the proposed rents, currently are higher. Over time, that could change as market area rents increase, and if they increase at a faster clip than the AMI, then the affordability over time will be enhanced relative to market. And so that's what I said, that the future affordability benefits will hinge on market rate rents increasing at a faster rate than 3% per year. Next slide. So now we just turn to the financial considerations. As Sean mentioned, that the city's investment would be limited to foregoing ad valorem property tax revenues. And in addition to that, there's another revenue source that would go down from the abatement of property taxes. And what that is the city currently receives from the state a form of property tax revenue called property tax in lieu of motor vehicle license fees. And that is tied to increases in assessed value. Now, this project was built in 2019. And so when it came on the tax rolls, it increased the amount of, we call it in lieu fees, property tax VLF in lieu fees to the city of about $75,000 a year. Now, when this property is, if it becomes tax exempt and it's taken off the taxable roll, then the amount of assessed value, taxable value in the city would go down by the removal of the project. And so the city would lose about $75,000 of VLF revenue from the state. So the two costs of the city are the ad valorem property taxes and also the VLF. And so I think the sum of that is about $380,000 currently per year. Now, if the city elected to sell the property under the bond term, the city would receive all of the net sale proceeds after retiring all outstanding debt. And the city could elect to either sell the property, or as they mentioned, the city could also syndicate it as an affordable housing tax credit project and keep the affordability in place. And that would be a decision for the future council to make. Next slide. This just runs through these property tax distributions. So the city of Milpitas is obviously one taxing entity, and it receives about 16% of the tax dollar. And you can see here that just for the property tax, the ad valorem piece, it's about $305,000 a year. And then you have the school districts and the community college districts and all of the county all receive a share. Now, these other taxing entities would be required to also forego their share of property tax revenues, of ad valorem property tax revenues throughout the bond term And they would not be entitled to any compensation at the end unless the city was just elected to do that. Next slide. So, and this just shows the total amount that, so the total foregone property tax revenues to all taxing entities over in the current fiscal year are estimated to be about $2.3 million a year. That includes also the $75,000 of VLF revenue that the city is foregoing. Next slide. This slide just goes over the term, over the bond term. So I'm showing for all taxing entities over the 30-year term. If we discount the stream at 3% to estimate what the current dollar value of loss is of foregone property taxes for all taxing entities, it's about $58 million. And for the city, it is about $9.7 million of foregone revenue over the 30-year term in $21. Next slide. Funding for capital improvements. So this is a concern to the city because the project has funding for capital improvements in the form of two sources. One is out of bond proceeds. And based upon the bond underwriting statement that we received, the amount that will be funded out of bond proceeds is about $3.1 million that will be set aside into a capital replacement reserve account. And that 3.1 million was derived based upon the findings of a property condition report that looked at the requirements for the project over the first 12 years. So remember, this is a new project, and its needs during over 12 years are much different than the needs of a project that is, 20 years old and 30 years old. And so in addition to the upfront capital account that will be funded out of bond proceeds, the project's cash flow will also provide funding. And during the first 9 years, about $300 per unit per year will be set aside, and that will escalate at 3% a year. And then following in year 10 going forward, the pro forma has assumed that $700 per unit would be funded per unit per year, and that would not be increased at an escalation, so that would be flat. And so if we look at the funding over the total 34-year hold period of the bonds and discount that to reflect 2021 dollars, it's estimated that a total funding of about $7.6 million would be available for funding capital needs. And based upon a review of even just the property condition report, $7.6 million would not be sufficient to fund the project's needs over 34 years probably. And it would, because the property condition report didn't look at, say, if you need a new roof or landscaping repairs or paving repairs or replacing doors or windows or any upgrades like that to the property. And so at the end of the bond term, it's likely that the project will need additional capital improvements, and those would have to be funded out of sales proceeds because that's the only source for funding those additional improvements, which would decrease the amount of revenue, net proceeds to the city, perhaps not by a significant amount, but there likely would be an obligation. Next slide. This summarizes our, we used the Waterford projection of cash flow and repayment of bonds, and that's reflected in scenario A. And then in scenario B, at the city's request, we prepared a more conservative projection. And instead of the assumption of a 3% annual growth rate in rental income, we assumed a 2% annual growth rate in rental income. And then we also assumed that there would be a need for additional capital improvements in year 30. And that $28.2 million was what we assumed. That translates into about a $10 million cost in 2021 dollars. And so this just shows the estimate of net proceeds that would be available to the city under those two scenarios. So under the Waterford projection, and where we differ from Waterford, while we assume their projections, we assumed a cap rate at the sale of 5%, whereas their projection is based upon a cap rate of 4%. And so the higher the cap rate, the lower the value. But right now we're in a period, a time period where cap rates are just at, are so low, they're at historic lows. And so we think that a 5% cap rate is probably more reasonable over a long-term projection like this. So that's why we assumed a 5%. So after, based upon those assumptions and the cash flow projection, we are estimating that the net proceeds that would be available after retiring debt in year 30 would be about $325 million. As I mentioned, the foregone property tax revenues to the city is about 15.4 million. So then the net return to the city under scenario A would be about $309 million, and those are in future dollars. So if you discount those dollars by 3% to estimate what the current value is in uninflated dollars, that translates into proceeds about $127 million. So that's after you recover your property tax revenues that you've foregone. And but it assumes that there is not any additional capital improvements. But even if there were, if you reduce that by $10 million, you'd be, at $117 million of net proceeds. So it's a significant, the project could generate a significant return, financial return to the city. Now, if the city elected to reimburse all taxing entities, then the return would go down, by to about 95 million, which is still a significant return by any measure. And then under scenario B, however, this highlights how sensitive the project's cash flow and the returns are to the assumptions. So with the 2% annual growth in rental income, those net proceeds after debt would only be about 102 million versus 324. And then you get down, if the city were to, the net proceeds to the city after recovering its property tax revenues, and if it had to pay $10 million of capital improvements, it would be down to about $24.2 million. And there wouldn't be sufficient proceeds to make all of the other taxing entities whole under this scenario. But the city is estimated to receive net proceeds of about 24 million. And if you look at, that could swing even lower, or, it could be higher, but that's what this scenario shows. Next slide. In terms of the financing, this is just really a recap of what's already been stated. But I just want to highlight that the returns to the administrator, Cscda, and the current owner are largely funded out of bond proceeds. So that's upfront compensation. And while the administrator does have some risk relative to the Series B bonds of getting paid $5 million at the end of the term, other than that, they're all upfront. And in contrast, the bondholders, the ability to get repaid and the returns to the city are entirely at risk and subject to the performance of the project. So, if there isn't sufficient revenues to retire the debt, if the project goes upside down, then it could be in foreclosure and the bondholders would not be repaid. So, and the city would not get any returns, would not get its property tax revenues back. Next slide. This is just a summary of the upfront payments to the different parties that are involved with the transaction. And so funded from bond proceeds, the owner of the project would receive $235 million for sale of Turing to Cscda. Cscda would receive upfront payments of about $1.2 million. The administrator would receive $4.25 million. And then, as I mentioned, additional 5 million upon the sale after year 15. Greystone is the property manager. They don't receive any proceeds out of the bond proceeds. And then there's costs of issuance of about $7.4 million. From cash flow, Cscda after year 6 will receive about $250,000 a year. The administrator after year 6 will receive $250,000 a year, escalated at 3%. The property manager receives property management fees of 1.75% of gross income, or at a minimum of $18,000 per month at a minimum. And that the payments to Greystone are very consistent with current market, and in fact, they're very efficient in their administration, their management fees. So they're not high.
Debbie, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I do appreciate you going thoroughly into this. I want to assure you that the council and the subcommittee members do have a copy of the report, and we will review it thoroughly. In the interest of time, I was hoping that you can power through your next few slides and only really highlight what you think really stands out. But we do have a copy of the full report.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, next slide. Let me see. So it's just that there's nothing new here. And just that the the performance, the returns to the city are contingent upon the performance of the project and the assumptions of the projection. And the capital reserves that they're setting aside appear to be somewhat inadequate to meet the project's needs over the 35-year term. Next slide. Next slide. And so in terms of just recommendations, it's really that if the city wants to have deeper affordability than the moderate income levels that are prescribed by the project, it would be for the rent reductions to be at levels that are below market rate levels, citywide levels, so that the project delivers enhanced affordability, and that the rent and income restrictions would be in compliance with HCD limits rather than Cscda, that the property condition report should be revised to reflect the project's needs over 34 years and funded at that level, and that the bond underwriting assumptions would be reviewed by an underwriter to be retained by the city and the city's financial advisor to ensure that the structure is consistent and with the city's requirements. Next slide. And these are just reporting requirements that you can see in the report. And so that's it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your work on this. I would like to give the applicant and their stakeholders a chance to respond to anything that was brought forward, or present us with new information, just to wrap up the meeting.
Council member Fan, thank you. This is Sean Ross. And Debbie did a great job and thorough job. And I think to our analysis is that the report is still in draft form. And we did have some differences of methodology, but KMA has done a very thorough analysis of the report. I did want to touch on a couple things. The way that we looked at rental savings for this project is that we took the weighted average market rents and grew them out over 35 years at 3%. And then we took our income restricted rents, which was on the slide that I had shown in my presentation, and we grew those out at 3%. And the total aggregate rental savings that we came to over our 35-year term, it differed a little different from KMA's analysis, but their starting rents were different. They weren't using the same starting rents that we were using, but we're showing $167 million in total aggregate rental savings, which we think is a significant public benefit. The other thing too is that when you add up the capital expenses, as mentioned by Debbie, we have a different number that she mentioned. So if you take the upfront bond issuance fees, which is the capital reserve fund and the reserve fund, which totals nearly $7 million, and then you add up the 35 years of operating reserves that get paid annually through the project's cash flow, we arrived at 16.557 million in total capital operating reserves. I'll make that point to say that that's well in excess of what market rate investors would budget for an asset of this quality, buying it. And in addition to that, as previously mentioned, we don't have any participation in the cash flow, nor does Cscda. So all cash flow at the asset level can only go one of two places. It goes to expedite the pay down of the bonds, or it goes back into the asset level. On the residual value standpoint, we did have a much different residual value. As Debbie mentioned, we are at historic lows for cap rates right now, and that's just a function of the interest rate environment. What I will say is that right now, buildings in Santa Clara County are getting appraised using a 3.5% cap rate. We used 4, they used 5. Candidly, 5 is an acceptable cap rate to use on a terminal reversion value, so we don't disagree with that. Our rent growth assumptions we would disagree with. If you look at rent growth in Santa Clara County, specifically Milpitas, the latest CoStar reports are forecasting 6% rent growth in Milpitas this year, and over 6% for Santa Clara County. So we would disagree on that. The last point I want to make on the bond underwriter comment, we're working with Goldman Sachs. There's been 6 investment banks, I think, to date that have underwritten these transactions. You've got Jefferies, you've got RBC, you've got Stifel, Goldman Sachs. I will tell you that we've been the most active participant in this space this year with Goldman. We've had, I believe, over 62 investors that have bought these bonds. So I'm not quite sure who else would need to analyze from an underwriting standpoint, but I will tell you that from a credit perspective, these transactions get scrutinized extremely closely because the investors in these transactions are pension fund advisors that are essentially buying municipal bonds. So the credit analysis is extremely thorough. With that, I just want to say thank you for allowing us to propose our project. We think that it's an exciting project with lots of public benefit. We look forward to continuing to work with staff and appreciate all of their time in this, and Debbie and the KMA team. We do have some revisions we would like to make to the KMA report, and look forward to working closely with staff and KMA on that. But we really appreciate the forum today.
Great, thank you. I want to pass it on to my colleague, Councilmember Chua. I think I do want to note, though, that I think Councilmember Chua has to leave at 10:30. So hopefully we can knock out the final points here, and if anything needs to be continued, we'll schedule it as such. Councilmember Chua.
Thank you, Councilmember Fan, and thank you all to the presenters today. And like Councilmember Fan, we probably need another meeting soon to digest more of this the massive data that we received today. I want to thank Debbie for a thorough analysis. And if I may, I just like to ask a couple of questions, just your background. One is, have you done any consulting with Cscda, or Waterford housing program?
We have not, done any work directly for Cscda or for Waterford as being our clients, no.
Oh, okay. So no affiliate, no previous consulting with any of those two entities, correct?
No, we have we have not done any work for either one of those entities or any other entity involved with the transaction, with Lion or anybody.
Greystone and all that. Okay, so much. And the other question I have on your projection, I think it's slide 34, 35. We don't have to go there. How much was at the end of the year 15 and 30? How much was the projected sale of the property?
The projected sale, well, let me get my, I have to look in my report. Okay, it might take me a few seconds.
Yeah, it's all right. You can bring it back.
Okay.
Back the next time. And I also.
I have it here. I'm sorry. So it was in year 15, we had estimated that the gross sales proceeds would be about 257 million. In year 30, in year 15, in year 30 it'd be about 401 million.
Okay, thank you. On the looking at my notes. I would like to see in the next meeting, if I will, a deep dive on the financial side. Break it down by, I don't know who's gonna do this, but probably Debbie. It's a month by year. What I would like to see is by year, how much is the projected income and how much is the projected funding for the repayment of the bond that year, and what's the basis of the, it's kind of like what you did on slide 32, I think, but it's more detail in terms of it's a yearly thing instead of a lump sum 15, 30 years.
Okay.
And I can specify that later on because I have to rush. I have 5 minutes. And also for the legal side, I would like to I would like to do a deep dive on the legal issues, including insurance, because insurance was not mentioned today. I don't know if that's your area, but I would like to see that.
Are you talking project property insurance? Are you talking bond insurance? What kind of?
Because what I would like to see is a replacement coverage and housing availability during the replacement period, just in case. And that's all for now. And I apologize if I have to rush. I'm committed to be in another place. And thank you all. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, staff.
So yeah, I would encourage the applicants to reach out to members of the subcommittee to inform us if we have any additional questions. Evelyn, your contact info is obviously available. Encourage you to reach out if you have questions. I do want to wrap this up with a couple of points that I think would be very helpful for us to consider at the next meeting. And I'm hopeful that we can schedule that sooner than later so we can move forward with action. So on the issue of affordability, I think that was mentioned a couple times here today. I think it was it John? I think you might have mentioned that there exists the option of deepening the affordability down the road. If that's something that the applicant is open to, deepening that level of affordability up front, I think that would provide a lot of comfort for the council and adds a huge value proposition to the project. And I think that's the main thing. I think that the subcommittee, the council would want to see. I'm sure there's more concerns that we can go over, but really that's the main thing, at least for me. I know that the question of the RENA requirements was brought up. I do want to note, though, that RENA has been very unrealistic with its requirements across the board for several decades. And it's difficult for me to see how any proposal going forward can actually meet RENA requirements these days. So I would note that that is a systemic issue to be corrected with ABAG and not something the scope of the city would engage in. And also in regards to the exit value, how the property will be managed and maintained. If you can touch on that at the next meeting would be very helpful. But overall, I see a lot of potential here. This is a great opportunity to add to the housing stock. And even though it's not perfect, I do think that it provides tremendous help for the workforce that does need housing. I think we need to differentiate between quote unquote affordable housing and workforce housing. That's a key distinction here, and both are needed. But what's being proposed here is workforce housing. So I'll leave it at that. If staff has any additional comments they want to touch on, I request that you be brief, but let's wrap this up for today.
No additional comments, Council Member. We will need to just to remind us, council direction was that the consultant fees be paid by the applicant. If we do additional meetings and add additional scope, that's something we'll need to coordinate with the applicant. So
okay, that's not a problem. In that case, either we continue the subcommittee meeting at another day, or if the project team, if the staff can prepare responses to the questions that were asked today to be presented at council. I think there was a lot of information that was brought forward today, and knowing the concerns in advance would be a tremendous help if this were to be presented outright to the council. So I'm comfortable with that if my colleague is as well.
Councilmember Fan, are you asking me to present this to the council, or?
No, what I'm saying is if the concerns that you brought up and some of the points that I raised, if that would could be touched on more specifically at the council meeting as it comes before us, instead of additional subcommittee meetings, because it was noted that that would incur additional, obviously, staff time and consulting time.
I'm not comfortable presenting this without answers to the questions that I have.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do another meeting on this one. Really.
Okay.
That would help a lot.
Sure. Yeah. That's totally fine. If staff can coordinate with the subcommittee members and the applicant, as well as the consultant if needed, and work out the specifics there. But at the end of the day, you know, I do want to see it move forward. I think a lot of us do. We just want to make sure that we get all the kinks worked out.
Okay,
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
move
Karen.
to close the meeting.
I'll second that. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thank you.